There are moments in life when a single action echoes far beyond what we can see. Padre Pio once spoke of a man who treated the Holy Cross with cold mockery. He said there is something that happens in the soul when a person rejects the very sign that opens heaven. Few understood what Padre Pio hinted at. He carried a knowledge that pierced into the hidden depths of spiritual consequence and mercy. He never described it fully. He only gave enough to stir reverence in anyone who listened. In this story, you will walk quietly beside that mystery. You will hear how Padre Pio saw a truth that can awaken any heart. When Padre Pio hinted at the fate of the man who mocked the cross, he did so with a gravity that could settle silence over a crowded room. He understood that every gesture toward the cross carries eternal weight. He also knew that ridicule aimed at what is sacred does not remain a simple human action. It reaches into the unseen world. It shapes the interior life. It opens a door that many never intend to walk through. Padre Pio never spoke to frighten souls. He spoke to awaken them. His warnings were carved from compassion. He wanted people to feel the spiritual reality that moves quietly beneath daily choices. He wanted hearts to understand that indifference toward Christ slowly becomes distance, and that distance becomes darkness if not confronted by grace. This man's story matters because it mirrors our own struggles. Any time we treat holy things lightly, a shadow falls over the soul. Any time we silence our conscience, we take one step further from the light that seeks us. Padre Pio's witness shows that the cross is not a symbol to be dismissed. It is a lifeline offered to us in love. Padre Pio once said that the soul reveals itself most clearly in the presence of the cross. He explained that grace presses upon a person in that moment. It invites, it whispers, it pleads. Some open their hearts, others turn away. A few respond with defiance that wounds themselves more than God. This was the hidden truth behind the story of the man who mocked the cross. The spiritual twist came when Padre Pio described how the man's soul appeared to him. He did not recount a fantastical vision. He simply spoke of a spiritual impression that God allowed him to sense. He said the soul carried a heaviness that did not come from suffering, but from resistance. It was as if the man had wrapped himself in his own defiance. Padre Pio remarked that the weight was not imposed by God, but born from the soul's refusal to receive light. This revelation startled those who heard it. Many expected divine punishment. Instead, Padre Pio revealed something far more mysterious. The greatest suffering a soul can know is not inflicted from outside. It rises from within when the heart closes itself to grace. This shift in perspective changed everything. It turned fear into humility and humility into hope. Padre Pio's insight was not meant to condemn. It was given to help people recognize the silent drama unfolding in every soul. He wanted listeners to understand that God never ceases to offer mercy. The danger comes when a person stops wanting it. That was the truth he wanted the world to face with courage and tenderness. Padre Pio often carried burdens that few could understand. His days were filled with confessions that revealed both human fragility and divine patience. He listened to countless souls who had wandered far from God, yet still carried a faint longing for the light they once knew. When he spoke of the man who mocked the cross, he did so against this backdrop of compassion. He saw how easily a heart could drift into places it never meant to enter. He saw how a single act of contempt toward the sacred could harm a soul without the person realizing what had happened. In his quiet way, he began to explain the gradual descent that had taken place in the man's life. He said the mockery did not happen in an instant. It was the final expression of many small rejections. The man had ignored moments of conscience. He had brushed aside gentle invitations of grace. He had surrounded himself with influences that numbed his awareness of spiritual things. Each moment seemed unimportant. Each decision appeared harmless, yet together they formed a pattern that weakened his interior strength. Padre Pio described this decline not to frighten, but to illuminate. He spoke about the slow erosion of reverence that can take root in any life. He said a person rarely wakes up one morning with the desire to insult the cross. Instead, a soul grows tired of resisting temptation and tired of seeking God. It becomes weary of prayer and unwilling to consider the weight of its own actions. In that weariness, the heart becomes vulnerable to coldness. It becomes susceptible to a kind of spiritual amnesia, where the sacred loses its meaning. The people who listened to Padre Pio felt the seriousness of his words. They realized that the man's story was not an isolated tragedy. It was a mirror that reflected the hidden struggles of many souls. Padre Pio gently explained that the cross stands as a silent invitation in every life. It asks for trust. It asks for surrender. It asks for humility. To mock it is to reject the very tenderness that seeks to heal the deepest wounds. Then Padre Pio spoke of the moment when he sensed the man's soul. He did not describe flames or angels or dramatic scenes. Instead, he spoke of a stillness that carried sorrow. It was the sorrow of a soul that had forgotten how to receive love. Padre Pio said the man was not condemned by God. He was trapped by his own choices. His mockery of the cross had sealed his interior world in a kind of isolation. Light approached him but could not enter. Grace surrounded him but could not settle within him. The man had built walls that only repentance could break. As Padre Pio reflected on this, he grew quiet. He wanted people to understand that every soul has the freedom to open itself to mercy. No one is forced into darkness. No one is abandoned without hope. But when a soul chooses distance from God, the consequences unfold with a solemn clarity. Padre Pio's voice trembled as he spoke of this spiritual law. He said the cross remains steady and faithful even when a person turns away. It waits, it endures, it calls. Padre Pio once revealed that grace does not abandon a soul even at the very moment it resists God. He said that God approaches with even greater tenderness when a person steps toward darkness. This truth shaped the heart of the climax in the man's story. Padre Pio explained that after the man mocked the cross, something stirred within the spiritual realm. It was not wrath, it was not punishment, it was an aching pursuit. The crucified Christ reached toward him with a love that sought to pierce the armor he had built around his heart. Padre Pio described sensing this struggle in a way that went beyond human sight. He said the man's soul trembled under the silent pressure of grace. It was not fear that shook him. It was the faint remembrance of a love he once knew. Even the hardest hearts carry a faint echo of God's presence. Padre Pio believed this echo was the final thread connecting the man to hope. Yet the man pulled away from it. He mistook this interior stirring for discomfort. He pushed it aside. He closed his heart even more. This is where Padre Pio asked listeners to pause. He understood that many people imagine God's justice as something cold or rigid. He wanted them to see something entirely different. He wanted them to see how love pursues a soul until the very last breath. He wanted them to understand that God suffers when a soul resists him. Padre Pio said the greatest pain felt in that moment belonged not to the man but to Christ, who stretched out his mercy and found no opening. This tender image left the room in silence. Then Padre Pio described the moment he sensed the man's soul after death. His words were measured. His tone was reverent. He refused to embellish. He only shared what God permitted. He said the soul appeared burdened by its own resistance. It could not lift itself toward the light. The heaviness came from within. It was the weight of choices that had shaped the interior for years. Padre Pio emphasized that the suffering did not originate from punishment. It originated from the soul awakening to the reality of what it had rejected. This awakening, he explained, was sharper than any earthly pain. It was the sudden clarity that the cross had been an invitation rather than an accusation. The man saw how each moment of mockery had been met with mercy. He saw how every dismissal of grace had been answered with patience. This realization broke something open within him. Padre Pio said the soul was no longer defiant. It was no longer proud. It was wounded by its own blindness. It longed for the light it once ignored. Padre Pio shared this part not to describe judgment, but to reveal hope. The soul had finally turned towards God, even though it had resisted for so long. The path forward was difficult. The heaviness could not disappear in an instant, but the turning itself was a victory of grace. Padre Pio said this moment revealed the deepest mystery of divine mercy. The soul that once mocked the cross now looked toward it with trembling sorrow. And in that sorrow God found a door. The listeners could feel the gravity of this revelation. They understood that no heart is beyond the reach of grace. They understood that mockery does not have the final word. They understood that the cross stands firm even when a person falls into darkness. Padre Pio's voice softened as he delivered the final truth. The soul was not abandoned. It was not lost. It was found at the edge of its own failure. God's mercy entered through the smallest crack and began the slow healing that only love can accomplish. Padre Pio allowed silence to settle after he finished speaking. He wanted every soul present to feel the weight of the mystery without fear. He explained that the man's story was not meant to leave people trembling. It was meant to draw them closer to the cross with a deeper understanding. He said the sacred does not demand perfection. It asks for openness. It asks for the smallest willingness to receive grace. Even a faint desire for God begins to untie knots within the soul. He encouraged his listeners to consider their own hearts with honesty. He reminded them that spiritual drift rarely announces itself. It happens quietly. It begins with small compromises. It begins when prayer becomes optional or when the cross becomes an object rather than a sign of love. Padre Pio urged them to return to the source of healing. He wanted them to rediscover the peace that comes when the heart softens before God. Then he offered a final message of hope. He said that no matter how far a person has wandered, God will always take the first step toward them. The man who mocked the cross eventually turned toward the light because mercy did not stop calling him. Padre Pio insisted that this same mercy surrounds every soul. It waits patiently. It seeks tirelessly. It enters wherever even a small opening is found. In this truth, he wanted all to rest. The cross is not a reminder of our failures. It is the place where every failure can be redeemed. Anyone who approaches with humility will find peace. Anyone who lifts their eyes will find grace unfolding with gentle strength. Padre Pio believed that this awareness could change a life forever. If this reflection touched your heart and drew you closer to God's love, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your presence here helps this message of grace reach many more souls.